When thinking about Viking culture and thinking about Vikings in general as fine warriors, you typically picture a big burly man with a battle axe. Now, why is that? Instead of, say, a sword or some other weapon or implement? Well, the average Vikings had, of course, wooden boats, wooden houses, and a lot of other tools and things in their daily lives made of wood. Not gonna cut it. No. In a quite literal sense, cutting down trees and harvesting this wood requires axes. And for a Viking who has this large axe able to cut through trees and the like to get the lumber they need to survive, well, they have that same metal tool that can be used for combat. After all, if you've got something that can chop through some large logs, why not use it to also chop through people's arms? Saves metal. In any case, axes are, interestingly enough, not what Beowulf's crew shows up in. No, in fact, it's noted in Beowulf that when Beowulf's crew shows up, they are greeted and saying, "Chainmail and swords, there's a dress code. You're denied." But what was peculiar about this? See here, the average member of Beowulf's crew, chainmail and a sword. Now, what is notable about this? That's a lot of metal. A lot of metal. Now, metal is a very expensive thing, especially fine worked metal made into full sheets of armor. Beowulf's men, if wearing full chainmail armor, not just chainmail shirts, have metal covering their entire bodies, protecting them completely from any sort of attack. Now, swords are notable too. After all, an axe most of the time will have a wooden handle with a metal tip, but a sword is completely metal. More expensive, more dangerous. Now, some swords used by people who couldn't afford entirely large metal ones would have grooves through them, called blood grooves. These would be used to simply reduce the cost of a sword if you weren't so wealthy, but we see no sort of mention of these in the ones Beowulf's crew is handling. No. Instead, you see simply swords and chainmail as described. Now, chainmail itself is beneficial in the fact that if you're wearing a whole sheet of metal, it's a lot harder for someone to stab you. Observe. It's metal on metal. Whereas if I, per se, impaled someone with a metal stick without wearing armor, it would have, shall we say, a slightly different effect. In any case, this is all very expensive. Now, 10 people showing up in chainmail and armor is certainly odd, but I think we lack a real appreciation of what that means in our day and age. Imagine someone rolls up with 10 tanks to a country border. Just 10 fully personal tanks. Fully weaponized, decked out, ready to go. This is expensive. Insanely expensive. Ludicrously and almost comically expensive. And they are ready for war. And so, naturally, the quote from Beowulf says, "There's a dress code, you're denied," as they didn't want people ready to make war in their kingdom. But it is that very equipment and those very people who are there to fight Grendel, the nation's great monster. Now, as we've seen, as wonderful as swords are, they are still metal, and Grendel's armor in Beowulf is shown to be harder than any sort of metal armor, plate mail, or anything else we know of, as weapons, axes, swords shatter when they attempt to hit it. But Beowulf's arms managed to do the trick for one reason or another. So maybe in the end, all this armor and money spent wasn't necessarily worth the investment, and maybe far more important was the man wielding this equipment.